It's very nice to have the voice of God taking care of the organization, so we got everybody into the right seat. These are very directional microphones, so don't be bashful in terms of leaning in, and it's a delight to have the second roundtable of having, I think, a presentation that set the framework, Dr. Salman. We've had a chance to participate together at the World Utilities Congress last year. There seems to be a very strong momentum here, not only because of the signing of this major declaration that came forward during COP28, which we should commend, but there seems to be a recognition that the role of nuclear energy, if we want to get to net zero, is very, very vital. What has shifted here now with this momentum, which I know you're very involved in terms of building coalitions and have worked with ANIC on the same thing in terms of the UAE and its role in development. What has shifted, do you think?
Well, thank you, John, for the welcome, and it's a pleasure to join all of you. I mean, who would have said maybe 2-3 years ago that we would have this gathering and we would be talking positively about nuclear energy at a COP. So this is a very, very successful road. But I think that, I think it's Oliver Stone who said it. Now we have to start building more nuclear power plants. So I think that we heard from other speakers what has shifted. And I think that we have seen much more realism and pragmatism in decision makers. We have seen that setting targets is nice, but we actually need to do what's needed to achieve them. So I think that is where we have started many countries change their minds. And I think that one thing that is also very important is many countries, many people have started to see that it's not just electricity, which is obviously very important, but there is the entire economy what needs to be decarbonized. And we heard from David and Stefan a couple of very good examples where, you know, data centers or steel, but I mean, we really need to recognize the staggering, as David said, size and the urgency of what we have in front of us. You know, I think that my friend Chris Levesque is somewhere in the audience. So he alerted me of a book that I think is very interesting. It's called How the World Really Works. I don't know if any of you have read it. And this book actually highlights that there are 5 materials that are the ones that truly move the economy of the world. And all those materials are enormously energy intensive, and they are not electricity. So we talk about steel, that's one of them. We have not talked about cement, which is another very important one. We haven't talked about plastics, which is, again, very important. And finally, ammonia, which essentially feeds the world, right? So for all those things, nuclear energy can have an enormous role, whether it's through electrification or whether it's through the use of steam that is produced through clean, affordable 24/7 nuclear energy. So that's where I really like to see this enormous growth going to the entire economy.
Great. Quick follow-up, and I'm going to bring the rest of the panel in. Ted O'Brien from Australia was talking about the need for planning, because you can't flip a switch and all of a sudden, you know, distribute, and there's a lot of reactors, you know, under construction as we speak today. But are we behind the curve when it comes to global distribution of nuclear development or not? I mean, as His Excellency Mohammed Mohammadi said, it's a race against the clock, if you will. What are your thoughts about getting there in time?
Well, we really need to accelerate. I mean, I think that particularly in Europe and North America, we really need to accelerate. The nuclear industry needs to invest in ourselves because well, the challenge is enormous. So we talked already about the very important challenge of the workforce. So we do need to inspire and bring into the nuclear community new people. I think that we have a good opportunity because part of this energy transition is making sure that we don't leave anybody behind. Yeah. So I think that there are many people that are currently in other industries industries, like the oil and gas, like the coal industries. I think we can bring those people into the nuclear industry. But overall, yes, we need to energize the global supply chain, and we really need to move forward with that. Obviously, we have good examples. We already mentioned how quickly China, Russia, Korea, we have the UAE example, have been doing this for a while, and perhaps in Europe and North America, we haven't really emphasized nuclear so much recently. But I think that everybody has their eyes quite open right now, and as we heard from Avi from GE, we really are ready to work together to accelerate this supply chain and this construction as quickly as possible.
Okay, Dr. Gernot, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but you're quite unique in a sense that you were born in Austria, correct? And then carry an American passport.
It does say that.
And you say, I always say it's risky to carry the passports because you can always lose the damn things, but I think you have a method to your madness here. Do you want to take it from there?
Sure. Actually, sure. Why not start with a show and tell? So, actually, 25 years and 1 month ago to the date, actually. So Austria built the full-size nuclear reactor and then had a referendum, 50.4% or so of the vote against, and decided never to turn it on. Was replaced with a coal plant that was operating for 30 years or so. By now it's a gas plant. But I don't know whether it was hundreds or a single-digit thousands of Viennese who died in those 30 years because of, well, particulate matter, pollution, and so on, because of this vote. Right? So, yes, as an Austrian, I'm supposed to be staunchly anti. And actually, so here's the amazing bit, actually. Okay, so not to just tell the personal story here, but so, okay, my entry point into this debate, as it were, was 2,000 words in the Wall Street Journal, almost 2 years ago, 2,500 emails within 48 hours, I believe. So, you know, like, and by the way, I'm not Oliver Stone, right? So you need to spend some time figuring out how to, you know, who I am, and then bothering, you know, looking up the email address and so on. And one of them was from, let's just say, a high Austrian official with whom I had coffee 2 weeks or so later. Green Party. 25-year history of active opposition to nuclear energy. And of course, the whole point was, by the way, Austrian of the Year, so, you know, there's a bit of that. And let's convince the little kid that this is not, right? The convincing might have happened the other way around. So there's still no public support, just to be clear, right? The president of Austria is not pro-nuclear as we speak. On the other hand, yes, there is the understanding that we have one steel plant in Austria, literally one. If that were to go fully electric, Austria's electricity demand would increase by between 40 and 50%. The country's electricity demand would increase. So, okay, the country of Austria is not about to build a nuclear reactor tomorrow. But how else does one think about that, right? And actually, this change in the conversation, even in a place like Austria, it has been amazing to watch, for the most part behind, in private, if you will, at the highest levels of government, but still, it's an amazing change in the conversation. And frankly, okay, Austria is 8 million people, who cares? On the other hand, the fact that globally there is no other way around it, I think, is pretty darn clear.
Good, and I think even what we've seen in terms of climate turbulence over the last 2 years is quite extraordinary. It starts to change the conversation looking for solutions.
Absolutely.
I won't do it now, but I'd love to have the view from industry, from an association and a professor addressing what is needed in terms of global leadership. I mean, to have this declaration and this movement at COP28 is quite extraordinary in itself. but let's cover that leadership a little bit later. I think with the presentation we saw today, this morning, Devon, which I'm sure you kind of had your eyes peeled to as well, you're dealing with the issue, right? You are a demand center with data, and I've actually been out to Google and Apple and looked at all the major technology companies and what they're trying to do to source clean energy. So why don't you address that in terms of where nuclear fits in, and your users of data, do they align, and do you have to worry about that as well?
Yeah, well, thanks very much, John, and I'm thrilled to be here. I'm really glad that Google can participate in this important conversation. So we come to this question as a large energy consumer, in particular a large electricity consumer. In 2022, we consumed 22 terawatt hours of electricity across the globe, and that's growing at about 20 to 25% per year, as Stefan showed in his slide earlier this morning. And we've been on a long journey to try to meet that growth as cleanly as possible. So in 2010, we actually signed the first non-utility power purchase agreement, corporate power purchase agreement for renewable power, for wind power, and really helped to standardize that contracting model for corporates to purchase clean energy. And now last year we've seen 37 gigawatts of new clean power capacity brought onto grids through these agreements, primarily wind and solar across the globe. And in 2017, we had purchased so much renewable power that we'd matched 100% of our annual electricity consumption across the globe with purchases of renewable energy. But we knew at the time that while that was an important milestone, 100% annually matched renewable energy purchases was not the same as operating on carbon-free electricity. And in 2020, our CEO, Sundar Pichai, announced a corporate goal to, by 2030, operate on 24/7 carbon-free electricity around the world at all of our data centers and office campuses. And what that means is bringing on new clean power technologies onto the grid to match our consumption on an hour-by-hour basis on the same electricity systems where we are consuming power. And when we set that goal, we were very deliberate about using the term carbon-free energy for 24/7 carbon-free energy for a couple of reasons. One, that's been referenced by many speakers on the stage already today, the scale of the challenge of the energy transition and the speed by which we need to transition mean that we can't take any solutions off the table that can help us get there. And we know that nuclear power has already played, in the countries that are producing it, a significant part in decarbonizing electricity systems. The second reason is that much of the leading energy systems modeling about how we're going to make this transition, and particularly on the electricity side, from organizations like Princeton University in the United States or the International Energy Agency, finds that we're going to need a portfolio of different carbon-free energy technologies to most deeply decarbonize electricity systems cost effectively, and that nuclear has a potentially important role to play in that. So in terms of our own goal and our own consumption and how we're meeting that, there's a few different ways that we're approaching it. One is we are continuing to purchase a lot more clean energy. So today we have 10 gigawatts of renewable energy projects under contract around the world, primarily wind and solar, makes us one of the largest corporate purchasers of clean energy. And so we're going to be purchasing a lot more of all kinds of different technologies and figuring out how we can fit them into a portfolio on the same grid where we're operating to better match our electricity consumption around the clock. The second way is we're focused on how can we, using our various capabilities at Google and our procurement and our sort of demand for electricity, help to commercialize next generation advanced clean electricity technologies, such as advanced nuclear, for instance. And the third way is policy and advocacy. How do we build this ecosystem of companies like Google that care about complete decarbonization in pushing forward these technologies and advocating for the policies that are going to help us to decarbonize electricity systems more quickly. And just one thing I'd like to mention is a report that we released a couple of months ago on the importance of what we call advanced clean electricity technologies, including advanced nuclear, and the role that they play in deep decarbonization, but also our own portfolio. If anyone's interested, you can just Google advanced clean electricity and you'll be able to pull up the paper immediately. But one of the things that we talk about in the report is that not only are these technologies critical for decarbonizing electricity systems cost effectively and completely, as I mentioned previously, but also our own internal modeling for how we see ourselves getting to our goal by 2030 across our global portfolio. The inclusion of these advanced clean electricity technologies, and in particular firm dispatchable technologies like nuclear power, reduces the cost of us achieving this goal by up to 70%, depending on the geography, because you don't need to over-procure, overbuild, if you're only relying on wind, solar, and lithium-ion storage to meet that same goal. The inclusion of these firm dispatchable technologies really does reduce the cost of this decarbonization approach.
Good. Just very quickly, just in a one-line answer, we saw Google up there growing in demand, above 30%. How long does that carry on for? Because I don't think the demand for data is going to drop anytime soon.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think we're right now sort of at the beginning of this transition to, well, some of the growth has been, cloud computing and the sort of less efficient computing that many organizations have on premise or in less efficient data centers into hyperscale data center facilities like those operated by Google and many of our other companies in our industry. And now we're sort of seeing the growth of an opportunity for artificial intelligence and machine learning, which has many potential benefits across the economy with respect to climate solutions, but also does, of course, require additional resources. And so, our focus and the focus of my team is how do we meet that as cleanly as possible, and how do we also orient the rest of the corporate sector that historically has only focused on purchasing from wind or solar power to the importance of clean, firm, dispatchable capacity in order to meet that growth.
Good. That was a long one-sentence answer, but I can't use you for television on that one, but it was very good. It's comprehensive. Orlen Synthos Green Energy, and we brought to this plenary, Rafael, to share the experience in Poland, right, and some of the challenges and demand, and also if you can share your insights for Central and Eastern Europe as well. And one of the issues you wanted to discuss is, the demand for heat, right? And heat systems and cooling systems and the demand for energy and where nuclear fits in. Do you want to take it from there?
Today is -5, let's not cool more. So have you seen the map of Europe with carbon dioxide emission marked? It's usually green, France is green, North Europe is green, light green, and there is usually one place which is deep brown or black. It's called Poland. Today's emission, I checked it an hour ago, was 928 grams per kilowatt hour. Highest in Europe, highest in the world. Comparing to France, you have 70, 80 grams per kilowatt. So you see that the emission in Poland is extremely high, and we have to decarbonize almost all energy production, energy generation. But at the same time, in Poland, we're going to decommission 200 coal-fired boilers with average capacity between 100 to 350 megawatts. So it created a situation when we have not only high CO2 emission, but we have also growing demand and going to decommission to many boilers. So prices are very high. Today it's $177 per megawatt hour, and the price is frozen by government, so cannot grow. But already 177 is fine for us. And you ask about the energy demand coming from heat. So in Poland we have district heating. Cities used to have district heating networks, pipes with the radiator with the hot water. They're really large. In case of Warsaw, you have 5 gigawatts thermal source of the energy to supply city. In case of all Poland, it's 55 gigawatts thermal. And we have to fully decommission all sources of this energy because they call fire. So together with energy system, where we have to replace these boilers, and we'll get gap between energy generation and demands between 12 to 18 gigawatts in the middle of 30, I'm talking only about the base load. It creates incredible demand for the nuclear energy. And if I can say that, frankly speaking, Poland probably is only one and the largest market in Europe for nuclear, large and small, for next decades, because there is no other solution.
Good. Is there a willingness to do so in government? This is the issue I wanted to bring up next anyway, and that is leadership. As somebody was saying in our sidebar conversations here, that the U.S., which is very divided politically, actually came together because China and Russia are leading on nuclear technology. So it comes like a wake-up call. What's the view in Poland here to move in this direction, Rafał?
So, in case of government, I prefer to talk about numbers and energy production generation. Political will is something what is fluent sometimes, and we are in the transition time from one government to another. 2 days from now, we'll have new government. But what I can say is that both governments, the old one and new government, they support nuclear energy deployment, and new government, which will come on Monday, they have in energy policy SMRs as a part of the country strategy to replace existing sources of energy in next 2 decades. So SMRs, they are part of the current opposition 2 days from now, a government's strategy for energy mix in Poland.
Great, thanks very much. Sama, I've talked about this with you in the past, but I think the debate has advanced quite a bit about leadership, right? And I think what has taken place here at COP28 when it comes to nuclear is a sign of that. But how did you build that coalition? Because you were instrumental in this effort. And which key governments did you work with to say, this is the leadership we're looking for, and here's the pathway to net zero? And I notice even the position of clean electrons and molecules is a different narrative. Is that part of that effort, if you will?
Exactly. So this is part of the platform that we wanted to build coming to COP28. So we definitely wanted to bring together the governments, obviously the industry, but also civil society. So, and this is the team effort that we are discussing here. So obviously having the leadership, the pragmatism of governments is essential to have these bold policies, these energy markets that are truly technology agnostic, these incentives towards the finance community to consider nuclear as a piece of the puzzle. So that's very essential. But at the end of the day, it is many of the people here in the room who will be building those reactors, operating those reactors, putting in place the entire supply chain and the entire ecosystem. It will be the regulators that we have here that are the ones that are going to enable to move these reactors forward. So this is a team effort. And then finally, and last but certainly not least, the civil society. I think there was this, I mean, if you ask historically the average person almost anywhere in the world, what do you think about nuclear? I will tell you that the answer was like, no, I don't have a problem with nuclear, but everybody else does. So there is always the perception that you are alone in your beliefs in support of nuclear. So what I think is changing is many of us, including policymakers and governments and many others, are actually saying, you know what, I actually support nuclear. And then we find ourselves that, well, many of us do. So that openness, that visibility of support of nuclear is certainly changing a little bit the way we are moving forward.
Good. And it does take political leadership sometimes, right?
Oh, it does.
Because they're medium-term projects. You don't flip the switch on their own.
Exactly. I mean, and this is the problem. We need to. I wanna quote what the Minister of Energy of Sweden said, and this is very important. We really need to start living politics outside of energy policy, and we need to bring back in science, facts, and pragmatism. So I think that policymakers, people in politics, they are starting to realize that nuclear energy and energy in general, clean energy, is infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't typically get built in 4-year increments. So we really need to work together with the different pieces of the political spectrum to do what's better for everybody, not just for us to gain the next election.
Yeah,
So,
and not be a prisoner of 4 to 6 year election cycles as well, right?
Exactly.
Dr. Gernot, go ahead.
Actually, so I'm an economist, full disclosure. What's been amazing to watch is sort of within the academic climate economics community. 10, 15 years ago, it was always, okay, economics 101 tells us you price carbon, you get out of the way, and we have to be agnostic around technologies. And sort of the 101 version is still that, but you quickly realize that the economics 102 version says, actually, we know. We know what it takes. We have to pick winners, not just the loser, and figure out what it actually takes to deploy, to invest, to make it possible. And that politically in the US, the Inflation Reduction Act, very much that sort of shift, supported by plenty of academic economists who wouldn't have said the same thing 5, 10 years ago. And of course, nuclear is part of this story.
Good. Devon, do you want to pick up on this idea of what are the challenges then for Google? You laid out the base case of why you're moving forward with this, because the demand is rising. For a technology company that everybody sees as needing to be on the cutting edge, looking for global solutions, moving very fast, what are the challenges to implement nuclear into your mix in a larger scale?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's actually one that we explore a lot as well in that paper that I mentioned. There's a few sort of issues we've identified. One is just the risks and sort of costs associated with first-of-a-kind technologies that are coming to market. These technologies are going to be coming to market at higher cost than the prevailing technologies that we have today. And we need to find companies that are willing to pay that green premium, as was mentioned earlier, to help bring those technologies through first-of-a-kind deployments and into sort of nth-of-a-kind deployments for repeated scale and cost reductions and learnings. The other issue is, corporate clean energy buyers that are purchasing a lot of wind and solar have become accustomed to short duration or shorter and shorter duration contracts. So when you first started with renewable energy PPAs back in the late 2000s, you were maybe expecting a 30-year power purchase agreement or a 25-year power purchase agreement, and that's getting shorter and shorter for those technologies today, whereas these technologies that we're talking about here are going to require sort of long-term revenue stability in order to advance and be commercialized. And so that's where I think you really need to think creatively about how you can work with the public and private sectors and combine different clean energy buyers together into these consortia that can help send that market signal for these technologies going forward. And that's actually something that we've also seen and have experience with on the carbon removal technology side. So we launched something last year called Frontier Climate, which is a consortium with Meta and McKinsey and a few other companies to essentially send a demand signal to the market to forward purchase carbon removal from nascent carbon removal technologies to help them scale, to help them move from that initial demonstration through to wide-scale commercial deployment. That's something that we're starting to look at as well in the electricity space in terms of how we can bring companies together to provide that demand signal, but also bankable offtake contracts for these technologies, which they're going to need in order to scale.
Okay, one more follow-up for you, if I can, Devon. I was just popped into my mind when you were saying this. Do you actually go to countries for the future data centers that are investing in nuclear? It's like it's going to be a reliable destination, and they're talking about it, and they say, we're ready to play. I was involved in Bahrain when they were trying to get Amazon Web Services there. It was a kind of a coup to get them on the ground and set up their data centers for the Gulf. Will you see that? Are you looking at that as a senior manager of this segment for Google to say, you know what, country X is putting in SMRs or they're planning for the long term, this is a good place to deploy our data centers?
Yeah, very much so. So although there are many different considerations that go into where we site large-scale data centers, since we've set this 24/7 carbon-free energy goal, the availability of clean power from all kinds of different technologies is one of the core criteria that we look at in terms of where we site future data centers. And given that we also have a keen interest to sort of help stimulate development of many of these advanced technologies, the ability to partner on those sorts of things with governments or with other companies in jurisdictions where we may build data centers in the future is also very attractive.
Great. I'm going to open this up a little bit, and Rafael, I'll start with you. Again, it's something that was going through my mind when I saw the opening presentation and the first excellent panel that we had, is how do you define ESG? And where does nuclear fit into the ESG portfolio, right? Because we've had quite a bit of debate at COP28 about, and we've wrestled with this in the various events that I'm involved with, and Asia's view of ESG versus the US or European view of ESG. How is it seen in Poland? And I'd love everybody to jump in. Sam, I'm sure you're kind of fighting to make sure that this is part of the green finance equation, right? Go ahead, please, Rafa.
Okay, so we are not a nuclear company. We start from the scratch. In Poland, there is no nuclear energy. This, what we represent, is the largest private industrial group and largest state-owned company. Together, we hold 7 refineries called Central Europe, from Lithuania to in Poland to in Czech Republic, several chemical plants. So this is private-public partnership representing, heavy industry, refineries, chemical plants, and demand side. So it's why we decided to create a company, Orlen Synthos Green Energy, to make by ourselves the SMRs and the decarbonized energy to supply our chemical plants, our refineries and the factories.
No issues about raising money then. Does that allow you to raise funding for your projects?
Yeah, absolutely. Just, the group has turnover over $100 billion US. Whole group, yes. Yeah, I have to check all this, and Orlen Synthos Green Energy. But what I would like to add, because you said about the presentation, excellent presentation by Stefan Quays today morning, really excellent. In Poland, we have a steel industry. There is no many places in Europe when the steel industry survive.
Yes.
So the steel industry represents, for just an example, because Stefan mentioned steel industry, 3 million tons of production. This is 6 terawatt hours of energy consumed right now. We've increased to 6 million tons, which is planning on one of the hours, which is planned on one of our site, which we developed together with ArcelorMittal. They're going to produce up to 6 million tons. It will require 12 terawatt hours of energy, just for this one site, one plant. And we think, for example, about the rebuilding Ukraine, where the steel production doesn't exist anymore. You will have additional 3, 4, 5 million tons a year, which you can produce in Poland. How to do this without decarbonization of energy is really not possible. So it's why we have several partners on several sites which we develop right now. Some of them, they are chemical companies, some of them, they are steel companies, steel companies, and some of them, they are former old coal-fired plants which are going to be repowered from coal to SMR. We chose BWRX 300 because it's fitting very well Polish energy system. Polish energy system used to operate with 300 megawatts boilers. So with 300 megawatts SMR, it's perfect from the view of the Polish national grid. Doesn't need to have much investment. Easy to connect to same place. And for the district heating, we don't need to have high temperature reactors. 200 degrees from the BWRX 300 is definitely enough. So it's perfect technology choice from my point of view, which helps a lot.
Great, thank you very much. Sama, do you want to jump in on this, on the ESG side? I'm going to ask Dr. Gernot to do the same. And I won't forget this, but I'm very curious if, in fact, to the point of that I asked Devon, if there's going to be nuclear facilities set up, will industries literally move and say, you know what, that country's going to have a very stable supply of energy, and I could relocate. I know you wanted to address it. Do you want to address that now, Dr. Gernot and Sama? That you're going to have these energy centers, and it'll actually attract industry. It's a different way of thinking. I know it was a priority for you. Go ahead, and I'll come back to Sama. Please.
I can be very brief. Yes.
My gosh, that was the one sentence
Yeah,
that you wanted.
absolutely. What sort of industries, though, instead of being so blunt and short, what industries are you looking at? Do you think that would move, Dr. Gernot? And then we'll go to Sama, please.
So, well, okay, so we started the discussion today with a deep dive on steel. Cement, so there are so many energy-intensive sectors that if and when they electrify, double, triple, quadruple, quintuple demand for energy overall. And of course, right, that is a very direct decision if you are planning, right, decades out. 2030 is tomorrow in many ways in the electricity sector. For steel, it is yesterday. Right, so when you have Salzgitter AG in Germany basically say we will be zero carbon by 2033, and by the way, we are not moving because we are named after the town that we are in, right? So there's no way we are leaving. We're either shutting down, which of course, national interest, German government wouldn't allow, or we need to figure something out right here and there. And you can pick sort of lots of examples like this, sort of Wolfsburg. Volkswagen is the big headquarters there. Now, this is Germany, right? So they're not about to put in a new nuclear reactor tomorrow. On the other hand, okay, so you have this small town, huge plant, literally the entire town, entire city, works for the plant, and there are two coal plants. The West Wolfsburg plant and the main one. And yes, they are ready to do something else, to burn gas in this case. It is still burning coal. And again, this is Germany and Austria, sort of the extreme examples here that are not about to move in this direction immediately. On the other hand, okay, there is a clear competitive disadvantage now in not choosing this path while at the same time having decarbonization goals that frankly are fortunately very ambitious.
It's interesting. It's almost, Sam, nuclear energy for foreign direct investment. You could almost position it that way, as if we go with the demand that Devon's talking about, right, for data centers, for example.
No, and this is something that I think is very important. We are here at COP, we are focusing our conversations on decarbonization and energy security, but let's not forget the third component, which is equity. So as Mavi mentioned this morning, we have 800 plus million people in the world with zero access to energy. And many of them are in the global south. And many of those people are looking at this energy transition as an opportunity to leapfrog from no energy to energy and sustainable development. So they are thinking of bringing abundant, affordable 24/7 energy to power that development, to localize industry and to bring investment and obviously to increase the quality of life. So I certainly see several countries in the world that yes, they are looking at nuclear energy, clean energy in general, in order to actually develop and to locate industry locally as part of that. So, and you were talking about ESG. Let's not forget that ESG has 3 letters, not only one.
Yeah.
And yes, it is incredibly important to do a serious analysis and look at the life cycle environmental impacts of all energy sources. So that's the E part of it. And obviously we are working very closely with financial institutions and standard setting organizations like the ESSB to make sure that nuclear is appropriately considered in that space. But let's not forget the S and the G. And the S includes bringing jobs, bringing sustainable development opportunities, growth, health, education, fresh water to everybody everywhere in the world. And clearly that needs to be taken into account also.
So, very interesting. Do you actually see the deployment into Africa for nuclear in a larger scale? We've talked about a leapfrogging effect if you get it right. There's been a very vociferous debate about letting the Africans have access to natural gas in the West, Senegal, Mauritania, Tanzania. I mean, there's some very big discoveries, but should nuclear be part of that global South discussion, or is it, and I'm missing something?
Yeah. No, I was recently in Cape Town at Africa Energy Week, And of course, Africa is definitely looking forward to make the most of their natural resources to power this growth and development. But they are also very much looking at nuclear as part of this overall growth. So there are many opportunities in using nuclear energy to help develop those resources. I mean, in mining applications, you can use nuclear energy to make the mining project less carbon intensive. You can help use nuclear energy to help decarbonize scope 1 and 2 in the oil and gas industry. So definitely those countries, they want to develop, they want to use their resources, and they would like to do it as cleanly as possible, but they don't want to stay where they are, for sure.
Great, okay, perfect. We have 4 minutes left, and I'd love to open the floor to you to address the key issues for nuclear development today and what is the right model. Is there money out there? This is again in the opening presentation, opening panel, which were both excellent. Are there funds from the private sector where the market finds a home? Sama?
Very quickly, and I'm sure that we will hear from Devon more clearly. I think that the traditional model of financing nuclear power plants, which was a utility, whether with public-private partnerships, that model, I mean, will continue. We will see some of that happening, but I think that we are going to see many new models. So we see the Googles, the Microsoft, the Amazons, the technology companies are going to need massive amounts of energy. We see the oil and gas industry looking into nuclear. They also have a lot of, I mean, they have deeper pockets than perhaps others. We see steel-making companies, the cement industry, etc. So I think that the financing models of nuclear are going to change, and the key here is to de-risk financially the first few projects so we can really kick out in the nth of a kind.
Great. Let's go to Devon and then Rafael, and we'll finish with Dr. Gernot on this subject, getting access to financing and moving more rapidly. I've heard this many, many times over the last week, the first week of COP. Go ahead, Devon.
Yeah, so I mentioned I think there's a really important role for corporate off-takers to play on the off-take side, but I also think there is a potential role for companies like Google to play on the investment side as well, because one of the barriers that we've identified for many of these projects is the upfront capital that's required just to get through the sort of engineering and design.
So you're actually considering investing in facilities.
We are looking to see how we can potentially use our capital more flexibly in the development stage of assets of all kinds of different clean energy technologies that are facing these kinds of barriers, with the potential promise of offtake on the other side, which is another model that I think you can think about combining in order to advance these projects.
That's really innovative, is it not, to get a technology company to do that? So it's almost guaranteeing supplies, and you get a good offtake agreement. You negotiate it on the other side, obviously, correct?
Yes, ideally that would be the case, yeah.
And one would say you have market power, I would think, with your cash flow. Let's put it that way. Rafael, go ahead.
So let's look a little bit differently on this problem.
Can you lean into your microphone
yes,
a little
sure.
bit? Yeah, thank you.
Let's look a little bit differently on this problem of financing. So what we talk a lot about the cost of doing first of the kind and problem of equity to finance this. But what is the cost of doing nothing? What is the cost of doing nothing for industry, which I represent? What is the cost when you have to pay 80 euros per hour for CO2 megawatt hour additionally? What is influence on this on your production, competitiveness of your business? So that's additional cost which we recognize.
That's an excellent point, because we don't hear it enough. Like we learn through conflict, right? Of not taking action, you leave yourself vulnerable. Go ahead, sorry.
So that's the first thing. Second, I mentioned at the beginning, there is not only huge demand on our side coming from the industry for CHPs, for district heating, for energy generation, but also the prices are very high, $177. So per megawatt hour. So why are we talking about the problems with financing? First, because financing industry is not familiar with all these numbers and the situation, which we have to just change by organizing maybe more meetings with people from finance. A second is that, from my perspective, the problem is that we have a fleet approach. We need to build a fleet of SMRs, not just one, first of the kind, or two. So we have to solve problems how to build supply chain to be effective and to deliver on time, and our financial requirements are a little bit higher than just for one reactor. Let's say that before FID we have to spend 50% of our fully financed by equity, because there is no big chance for debt before the FID. So it creates certain problem. But with SMRs, with this definitely smaller number of investment required, we're talking about 2, 3, 4 billions, not more.
Okay, great. We're just out of time right now, so Dr. Gernot, if you want to do that in a minute, have at it.
I teach MBA students. And by the way, so I teach MBA students, there's 800 a year, and 400 of them by now voluntarily take a climate class, which is amazing, up from 50 out of 800 2, 3 years ago. And the bread and butter is sort of, your little Excel spreadsheet and your LCOE calculation, levelized cost of energy, of electricity. And I can proudly say that, final exam, which I'm giving as we speak, by the way, they're all taking it. Is,
so they're growling at you as they take it?
Yeah. There is, sort of, 500 words, go nuts, right? Like, summarize what you learned. And by and large, so I hope this is not live streamed because I'm giving away the answer right now, is take a small step back from the project LCOE calculation. Consider the cost of not acting on climate. Consider a frontier-style model of advanced market commitment and so on. And by and large, let's say more than half of the average student taking this class starts with nuclear energy as being the solution, a big part of the solution, and one that has a cost advantage, has the sort of advantages that we've just listed, that frankly make it a big part of what we should be focused on, much, much more so than the typical climate conversation would lead us to believe.
Good, that's a great way for us to finish. Just a reminder, what we have after lunch, it's excellent, because we're going to do a whole session on finance, and we have the Minister of State of Energy from Sweden, which I had the former Prime Minister of Sweden who had to put in carbon pricing, the first country in the world to do it, and we'll talk about how that'll influence more investment into nuclear as well. Dr. Sam, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much. Dr. Gernot, nice to meet you and have you. Devon, I got to say, the innovation that you're bringing to the table to change that energy equation, and the Polish example, Rafael, I appreciate. Can we get a nice round of applause before we go to lunch? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take a picture.